the lady in the
purple.
Purple?
A concern that I have not really heard mentioned tonight, and as a New York State taxpayer, I want to know where the money's going to come for this millions of
400
dollars,
million.
Convention. Where is the money coming from? I know that, but
Is that from me?
I mean, it's going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars.
I'm tempted to answer it by saying the government hasn't really advertised this referendum, so it won't have to pay that money. But that's just off the
Now, that's the
cuff.
money to pay the people after, if it is opened. You gotta pay all these people that $300 a day plus all their expenses. That's
Times
gonna add up fast.
204, right? They get paid.
Plus staff.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
If I could just, so very briefly, this has been very heavily discussed in the media, these numbers, and they are highly contested. If you look at the opposition website, it says 300 million. If you work out the numbers, the scholars who have looked at it, there was a great, I would call it an expose in Politico, New York. That would work out to about $1.5 million per delegate. And I think common sense, if it was the $340 million figure with 200 delegates, it's a preposterous number. The math was based on somebody extrapolated from the original cost with inflation.
From
And
67,
they calculated the inflation factor twice. That's how they originally got to the 300. So the original one, and it was very expensive actually in New York compared to Illinois and other states, at 11. They went from 11 million to 300 million. Those scholars who've looked at it think we're talking about a max of maybe 100 million. New York has one of the more expensive ones because it does specify in the Constitution how much the delegates should be paid. And I think for a very good reason, because typically we don't want competing branches to determine the pay of somebody in another branch, because you can't reduce the Supreme Court judge's salary during the term and whatnot. So by specifying the pay, you got rid of a problem. Like in Rhode Island, they didn't specify the pay in the Constitution, and the legislature was constantly threatening to take away the pay of the delegates. So there's a problem. Remember, we're talking about a budget of about $160 billion a year. This is rounding change, and I think it's very interesting that in their early conventions, when New York was 100th of the size it is now, the people were much poorer. There was no discussion in 1846 about the cost of a convention. It's only in these small states that have these conventions. It somehow becomes a big issue because nobody disagrees that spending money is a good idea. It's one of the safest type of argument. People think, oh, that's a lot of money. It's a incredibly small amount. When you poll New Yorkers and how much do they think of as wasted government, you get incredible numbers like 30 or 40% of the budget they think is wasted. You know, businesses routinely spend 1% or so on control mechanisms, accountability. Even if it was 300 million, and I've articulated why many very thoughtful people think that's an absurd number, it's still a tiny amount. If you just think of what we spent on the Second Avenue subway, 4.1 million for 2 miles, you know, we're talking about 500 feet or 1,000 feet of the Second City subway. But it does sound like a big number.
I'm sorry, look, that fallacious argument can be made about anything you want to spend money on. I mean, that holds no water. If you compare that with every budget item, we would be bankrupt. Just to say 150 million, well, we spend it on other things. That argument can be used on every single budget item. Excuse me, but that's fallacious reasoning, and you should stop that. You know that. You know that.
Well, just very briefly, the theory of budgeting is you should always, for every proposed budget, somebody should be able to say, oh, you can spend the money better on something else. So the binary comparisons is actually an appropriate way to think about trade-offs, economic trade-offs.
Yes.
So I think the concerns about what might happen bad are definitely worth thinking about and being concerned about. But I'm just curious if you could each describe if you think there's something good that might come out of it, and for example, something that might reduce the level of corruption or improve the way the government works somehow, Do you guys think there's a chance that something good like that might come out of it, and what would it be?
I have many things, most of them are pretty obscure, but.
No, I
do you
mean,
wanna-
I mean, like, it has a real chance of actually happening. Like, if we do this, like, something that really has a good chance that could make things better. That's what I'm asking.
I'll pick a really trivial one that has been, I've invested quite a bit of time in, it's one of my favorite areas of research, is updating the journal clause. So almost every constitution has a journal clause which says that you have to record the votes. You have elected representatives, we live in a representative body, you should know how they vote. And and that's in the federal constitution as well as the New York Constitution. And that's a very outdated clause. I did a study of the 99 state legislatures. Nebraska is the one with the unicameral one, that's the one, it's not 100. And the big states like New York do not allow you to look at roll call votes by individual your representative. You can't look up and see how your representative voted. They just don't do it. They don't make those votes also available in machine-readable format. Now, I think that's a disgrace. Small states like Vermont and Maine and New Hampshire do that, but not. And there are many things that the journal clause should be updated. They don't want to do it because the first thing an opposition candidate does is also lobbyists do, and they pay huge amounts of money, is they want to be able to analyze how individuals voted officially. It's a disgrace that the legislature doesn't do it, and it should be, the journal clause should be updated to the modern world. And you should not have to depend on the legislature to display their own activity. It should be available so third parties can take the raw material, mash it up, and actually present useful information to constituents. They have a very pretty website, but not a useful website. So I would update the journal clause. The whole structure of ballot access, I think, is barbaric in New York also, but I've written an article about that. We need to open up the ballot. The control that the government has on the display of the ballot is completely unnecessary with modern technology. So we need to rethink that. We'd get rid of a lot of the petition signature problems and whatnot if we had a modern structured ballot. So there are many things like that, and I think they would come out in a discussion. And one of the things that really appeals to me about a convention is most people don't have any incentive to think about these issues because they know that a lot happen. But you create a convention and all sorts of people and ideas come out of the woodwork because finally there's a chance that something might happen. And one of my biggest problems with the good government groups is I don't think they're really very thoughtful and creative because they're sort of, most of the time they walk around, it's hopeless to do things. But here, it would unleash tremendous creative energy, and I think there's a very strong track record of that.
I would agree that the dynamics in the room could lead to something very productive. I would disagree on ballot access. I think going around door to door and getting signatures to get on the ballot is a much more little d democratic way to get on the ballot than any other way that we could do it. And I've been there, I've done it, I've gone door to door. I've been out in snowstorms in Buffalo getting signatures to get delegates on the ballot for a Democratic National Convention. I've been out in near hailstorms in June and July getting signatures. It's an important part of the political process, and I don't think we should do away with that. But that's a personal disagreement between us.
No, I'm actually not proposing that at all. I think you understand what I was proposing.
But I also think that
I think to go into here.
possibly, if you get these individuals, if we can get the free thinkers, those who are open to new ideas and creative ways of governing, there is the possibility you could see reforms on ethics, a real ethics law with some elected official with the real power to investigate and put other elected officials in jail if they violate the public trust. I personally would like to see such a convention explore the possibility of going to a unicameral legislature. The main reason we have a two-chamber legislature anywhere in the world is because that the upper chamber, its history is a chamber of the nobility. That's what it was for. The upper chamber of any legislative body, think of the United Kingdom's Parliament. The House of Lords is the upper chamber. The United States Senate was created not for that purpose, but for the purposes of a compromise, to ensure that small states had equal representation with large states, and the House of Representatives was by population. If you no longer have that compromise, or the need for it, the Supreme Court case of Reynolds v. Sims from the 1960s said that having an upper chamber in a state legislature that represented political units was unconstitutional because it didn't have one person, one vote as its basis. So I would argue Reynolds versus Sims 50+ years ago made the upper chamber of state legislatures obsolete. And there's no need for them. So I would like to see a constitutional convention at least look at that idea. Is it viable for New York? I don't like the idea that Nebraska uses with nonpartisan elections. Because with nonpartisan elections, I think what you get is more domination of the political process by the wealthy elites than you do now. I mean, we have a problem with campaign finance, yes, but if you take away party labels, it's billionaires galore. So I would like to see a constitutional convention address real structural change in New York. Maybe get rid of the upper chamber, look for campaign finance reform, stronger ethics laws, and if we do get a convention without a reform process, that this convention would address a process that would work better in the future. So those are the kinds of things I would hope that would come out of a convention. I wouldn't want to see it create a politically appointed board or commission to govern the state pension fund. I'd rather be able to throw the bum out if he's not doing a good job. Not that Tom DiNapoli's doing a bad job, he's a personal friend of ours, and I don't want to see him thrown out of office.
Okay, thanks. Before we continue, there's another component to our program, and that is the open mic. Are there people here who want to save room for open mic? Or is this question and answer period doing the same thing for you?
Yeah, I think that's fine. And I have a question.
Okay. Next then?
We've heard volumes of information tonight, and we need to take this show on the road because the general public has no sense of what is happening here. And I would like to know where can we go and get some specific bullets that we can help educate the public regarding constitutional convention, because many people are going to flip that ballot over and have no sense of whether they should vote yes or no, or maybe not even flip it over, not knowing it even on there. And I just, one of the challenges that I've been asked to do is to help educate the public. And so with short attention spans, we can't possibly share what we've heard tonight, because they would be asleep on us. But if we could go somewhere and get some specific bullets to...
Some of the information back there has...
Jim's website is excellent.
Jim's website, okay.
Ballotopedia has a great deal of information about process.
I'd be willing to share them.
And from the back table too.
From the way.
Back table.
And Dora said she would be willing to come and talk to anybody for it.
Okay.
Okay.
All set. Let's see, some new faces then. You please?
Well, here we are in a meeting that's sponsored by League of Women Voters. I'd like to say, what would both of you suggest as a solution to the 3 men in a room?
We solved that, there's 5 men in a room now.
5 men?
Well, under Spitzer, he introduced the concept of having the minority leaders from both chambers in as well.
I think the 3 men in the room is closely allied to the unicameral proposal, because what you would want to have is one legislature that really isn't a legislature, but one man controls the legislation. Everybody is fearful of that one legislation. So you have to look what are the points of leverage that the assembly chair has. One of the really critical points is he controls the districts. So if you piss off the assembly leader, he can just...
And staff.
Yeah, he can basically get rid of your district, and it often happens. So if you cannot go up against the leadership, because it's going to destroy your next, or if that period, you can't, and there are those points of leverage. If we had an independent redistricting, that would eliminate the significant point of leverage, I think, of the chair that terrifies the membership to cross it.
And that's another thing I think we would both agree should come out of a constitutional convention is take redistricting out of the hands of the elected.
So if you're going to go with unicameral, you have to fix up the 3 men in the room problem, because you don't want to have the tyranny of the legislative chair. There are many other proposals. I think the gerrymandering is one. enforcing the 72-hour disclosure rule, because they get in the room at the last minute, and everything is done. The legislators haven't even read the bills, and they're actually law. With the convention, they can just propose it. And so these problems have to be solved before you can seriously propose a unicameral legislature. So it's a very important problem.
2 points. Ask Mike Bragman about the 3 men in a room, or actually about the punishment of the speaker. He led a coup against Shelley Silver in the late 1990s, and he found himself with he was the majority leader of the state assembly. After he led the coup and failed, he found himself with a basement office in the legislative office building. Those are the kinds of things the speaker controls. With respect to 3 men in a room, when Nelson Rockefeller became governor, he fought for years against a disjointed legislature that couldn't seem to agree on what time of day it was. And the 3 men in the room, when it was initially introduced, was a way to get the legislature and the governor communicating. It was actually a positive reform at the time. It became institutionalized and bogged down in this, if these 3 guys agree on it, and it was always men, if these 3 guys agreed on it, it became law, regardless of what the rest of the chamber wanted. So it started out as a reform, an extra constitutional reform, if you will, a political attempt to change things, and it became institutionalized and just screwed up the way the state governed itself. But yeah, and I think that yes, you need to get rid of that, but a unicameral legislature that is more parliamentary in nature would probably avoid the 3 men in a room situation, if you could implement it. Getting to it is getting around.
And I just want to add, the author of the book of 3 Men in the Room came up with a revised edition recently, in which he has a chapter endorsing a state constitutional convention. And just for those of you who don't know, the 3 men in the room idea is that New York government is not really run by a legislature with many individuals, that the entire government is really decided by the governor and the heads of the House and the Senate. The rest doesn't really matter. And what you want to do is disperse power, so when you elect a legislature, they actually can do something.
Yeah, Denise points out that now with the independent Democratic caucus in the Senate, there's actually a 4th person in the room, the leader of that caucus, that goes whichever way they think they're going to get their bread buttered with the Democrats or the Republicans in the state Senate. So there's actually 4 people in the room now. I guess David Patterson and Governor Cuomo didn't like the 5 men in a room that Spitzer implemented.
Thank you. We'll be winding up shortly. We'll have time for 1 or 2 more questions, Darren.
Yeah, this is actually more of a comment, but based on what I've heard tonight, there is a qualitative difference between the vote to start the process and the vote on the final product. And in a way, it's kind of like Schrodinger's cat. If people are familiar with the experiment, is you put a cat in a sealed box with poison, and as long as the box is sealed, you don't know whether the cat is alive or dead. And you only know by opening the box. And I think opening the box is that first vote. And so, and I also believe there should be a litmus test for the final product, in that are the things that are included in that final vote things that are structurally changes the state government to make it more participatory and more open, or is it just removing or adding things which again might actually harm certain entrenched rights and freedoms? So I believe that's the litmus test, but I would much rather vote to start the process in order to vote down a constitutional change that stinks to high heaven. So strategically, I would say that the best avenue is to vote yes on the first one, and then of course if it's horrible on the second one, then just go ahead and vote the final product down. So that's just my opinion on it.
Okay, thank you, Darren. Dara?
I just have one last comment, and it's going to be almost contrary to what you just said. I'm not a gambler, and I think that's what is being asked of us. I think the possibilities are amazing, and what could happen would be wonderful. But then I look at the news every day. I see people coming out of Albany in handcuffs. I see the lobbying that I do to legislators who say not the nicest things to the teachers and the people that come in to lobby them. And I think we're going into a process that we really can't see. We don't know what the delegates will be like. We don't know what the process is going to be like. There's no guarantee that anything would get done. There's no guarantee that something will get done that will take away the things that we value today. So guess what we're being asked to do is, how much are you willing to risk? How much are we willing to trust that it's going to be okay? You know, November 8th, I trusted in the people of this country. And I don't know that I'd be willing to make that risk again. I think that there's a lot to be said. And I think if we could fix the system, if we could set it so that our delegate selection was better, the parameters were set, there was more transparency in the process, I think then we could go to that place. But I think asking people to trust a system that is so broken, it's like, you know, when we had the Wall Street bailout and the hedge fund managers fixed it. I almost feel a little bit of deja vu here right now. That's all that I can say.
Just the last count. Voter apathy. This is on the ballot for this year, off election year. And in your esteemed estimates, what are the chances that even a slight possibility of a majority of people even know what it's all about, to vote on it, informed, to be an informed voter?
Well, the level of knowledge is very low. Most people aren't even aware that they don't know that they have a state constitution. They don't know.
They don't know even to turn over the ballot.
They're not taught in school. It's just not part of the curriculum, and people haven't experienced it. They have at least an intuition about candidate races, and when they get in the ballot, most people don't know, but they can vote Democratic or Republican. They have some simple things, and so it's a problem. The way it typically works out is most people don't know, and there's a vast amount of money spent the last week or two against it. It's absolutely incredible cost, all the risk, the Pandora's box. And so the undecided, oh, this sounds scary, and they'll vote against it. And so again and again, in New York in 1997, it was ahead in the polls at this point in many other states, and no side, which in practice has unlimited funds and motive to spend them, will spend the money,
Well,
and
why are
it'll
you all
switch.
saying that the no people have this nefarious motive?
No, I'm not saying nefarious. What I'm
Nefarious motives on
saying
the other
is
side.
having studied in different states
But-
where the resources are, like in
But you're
Connecticut,
asking
they
us
were ahead by almost
trust
20%,
everyone.
and the no side outspent the yes one 49-1. I'm talking about the resources. And the part that I do have a problem, the 300 million type of figures, to me, the Pandora's box argument is completely wrong. The whole virtue of a constitutional convention is that the legislature cannot limit the agenda.
But
So
you
to
can
me,
tell
that
me
is the
that
greatest
no
plus, and when I
out-of-state
see
money
people
would come in.
disparaging the
Wait.
greatest feature, it's a problem for me. So that's where I'm coming from. I think I explained that in the opening.
But there are nefarious people on both sides.
Oh, sure, oh, yes,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Thank you. That's-
And quickly, in response to Jim's point about the scheduling of the vote, yes, it's in an odd year where we have only local elections and turnout is minimal to begin with. So that's another problem with the scheduling. If you want people to be aware of whatever your particular argument is, whether you're in favor of a constitutional amendment or a constitutional convention or opposed to it, you need to educate your friends and neighbors. Get them to forums like this, point them to the websites, inform them and let them go out and make an educated vote, and get them to the polls. Our turnout in off-year elections, next year is not an off-year election, next year is a midterm election. Don't let people in the media fool you and tell you that next year is an off-year election. This is an off-year election. Turnout in off-year elections is abysmal.
Thank you.
Turnout in midterm elections is awful. Turnout in presidential elections is meh.
Yeah.
33%.
We don't turn out to vote. And even on important issues, whatever you think, yes or no, even on important issues, like deciding whether or not to restructure your state government, people just go, they don't care. Yet they'll complain about taxes, they'll complain about their elected officials. You have a chance to decide how the rules are going to be written, or whether they're going to be rewritten or not. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your relatives, learn, go out and vote. In political science, we also have this thing we talk about called the vote paradox. We turn out to vote in presidential election years, and there's a little mathematical equation I write on the board for my students, or a comparison, an inequality. Let's assume that 100 million people vote in a presidential election year. The value of your vote is 1 over 100 million. We don't turn out much in off-year elections or school board elections, so let's assume you live in a very heavily populated school district where 10,000 people show up to vote. Your vote value is 1 over 10,000. Which is worth more? Which is a bigger number? 1 over 10,000. You want another little tidbit of information to pass on to your friends and neighbors about the importance of voting in local elections? The single largest contributor to your tax obligation is your local school board elections. Not who gets elected president of the United States and what they can or can't do to your income taxes. Your local school board, your town board, city council, county legislature, the largest portion of your tax burden comes from local government, not the federal government. So if you want to complain about high taxes, vote in November, not next year.
Well, while we're clapping for them, let's give them a really big hand because they made a lot of personal sacrifices to get here tonight and enlighten us as they did. Thank you so much. And to you good citizens, I'd like to commend you on putting them to work like you did and trying to learn a lot about this complex subject. I'll leave you with one quote, George Bernard Shaw. Democracy is a device that ensures we shall be governed no better than we deserve.
And a hand for Karen.
Yes.